I'm Johnny Darkness, and this is my world. Remember that? Remember when Johnny Darkness, when he said that? That was truly the moment the world became the World of Darkness. You know how every one of the World of Darkness game lines deals with a dismal fringe aspect of the human condition? Vampire the Masquerade is about the slow creep of callousness and psychopathy, and the struggle against the inevitable demise of your moral compass and humanity. Mage the Ascension is about the schizophrenic power fantasy of a subjective reality, and the responsibility that comes with being able to change anything and everything, as well as the politics of belief itself. Wraith the Oblivion is about the existential depression we face when our flawed and incomplete lives are drawn in by the maelstrom of mortality. Changeling the Dreaming is about the cruelty of the world against the sort of whimsy and fantasy that many neurodivergent folks especially embody, and how the capitalist grind alienates everyone from their deeper selves. Werewolf the Apocalypse is about the destructive urges of uncontrolled rage directed against everyone and everything in a self-righteous struggle against an implacable force that renders everyone helpless. Well, Mummy the Resurrection is about going to therapy. No, it really is. It really is that. World of Darkness is all about like dark gothic punk and moral ambiguity, yes, but Mummy specifically is about dealing with your problems and doing good in the world. It's a ray of light in the sinister urban fantasy horror tempest. And that's a little bit controversial for some. It might not strike you as obvious even, since they're, you know, they're mummies, not mothers. They're the guys with the cloth wraps lurking in ancient tombs. They're rarely heroic in fiction. They made a whole bisexual movie about it in 1999. I'm pretty sure this is not the good guy of the... Not to be like prejudiced, but I'm pretty sure this ain't it. I would have expected this from Angel the Salvation as a game line, which doesn't exist, but which I think would be cool, and for which I have a document in my personal OneNote with ideas. A crucial thing to note before we continue is that there's more than one Mummy lore, and I don't mean that there's also a Chronicles of Darkness version. This is all World of Darkness. There were 3 editions, the last one came out in 2001, and how the game works has changed pretty dramatically from edition to edition, but especially in 2001. I wouldn't say that the latest Mummy version is a full reboot of the original Mummy lore, which was a bit but not a lot darker, but it is a soft reboot that acknowledges and even incorporates how most of the old lore used to work. But because of major metaplot events, things are just a little different now. I will be focusing on that latest edition of Mummy, but as we go through it all, I will pay special attention to the old lore as well, explain how things are different, and also how they might be the same to a certain extent, because it's not like the 2 lores are incompatible. There's just been a sort of in-universe paradigm shift. And if you're a bit of a World of Darkness pro, you might be able to guess what this paradigm shift that happened in 1999 may have been. Okay, so what is a mummy? Why are they all in my area? What makes them so desperate? It's autumn. Why are they hot? They should just turn down the thermostat. Immortality is a power many beings in the World of Darkness possess, and they all achieve it through different means. Vampires are undead, changelings get reincarnated, ghosts, well, they just are dead, and some werewolves become spirits untethered from time. The approach mummies have taken is quite ingenious. It's to just be alive. I'm not talking some sort of false life here, I'm talking they are living, breathing people who are truly and genuinely alive, arguably even more alive than regular humans. They experience reality with a powerful intensity, deeply sensual, aware of the rustling of the leaves, the smell of the rain, the taste of fresh peach juice in their mouth, and the fabric of the sweater on their arms. Do mummies have autism? I don't know, do they have autism, do you think? They burst with vitality and emotion. Every old couple holding hands fills them with comfort and joy, and every child dropping an ice cream cone tugs at their heart. They can even have their own children, or at least the newer ones can. The thing that animates them is called Sakhmu, true and pure life force that permeates the universe. They do not have any innate supernatural powers like gifts or disciplines. They are, in effect, human, though because they are bursting with vitality and have incredible time spans to perfect certain skills, they can often push human abilities to superhuman levels. And you might sort of in fact call that a supernatural power. I feel like you should. You'd be making a very good point. Mechanically, this means their attributes are not limited to a maximum of 5 dots, which is the limit for most beings in the world of darkness. But the higher limits fluctuate with their own life energy and alignment to Mart, the balance. Most mummies do know a type of sorcery though, so they're not entirely without supernatural trappings. Through their society, they can learn the many crafts of Hekau, ancient Egyptian magic of immense power also practiced by many mortal mages. But due to their innate control of Sakhmu, inborn talent, and the time they can spend to perfect these sorcerer's crafts, means that mummies can master Hekau to unparalleled heights of sophistication. But more on Hekau later. At the end of the day, mummies are effectively living human beings. Thus follows that mummies have regular human needs. They need to breathe, drink, eat, sleep, and when you put a bullet in their head, they die. Usually, there's ways of putting bullets in the head where people don't die, but mostly they do. They even age and like become too frail to live. The difference is that when they die, they don't stay that way. Their soul goes into the underworld like any other. The underworld of World of Darkness is also known as the Lower Umbra, by the way. And to give you a brief overview, it's made up of the memories of things that exist and existed in the real world. The latter much more so than the former. And eventually, as they are forgotten, they drift down like marine snow into the storm-racked sunless sea. Or, you know, other manifestations. It's not always an ocean. There's a huge pile down there known as the Labyrinth. And at the bottom of the labyrinth lies oblivion, the all-consuming maw that is the end of everything, slowly consuming that labyrinth as it sinks further and further down. If you want to know a whole lot more about the dead and the underworld, check out my video on Wraith the Oblivion. Because the labyrinth is already too low, we are interested in what's above it. The Dark Kingdoms, specifically the Dark Kingdom of Sand, the Egyptian underworld, which is where dead mummies spend a lot of time, sometimes years, collecting new life energy for themselves, replenishing their stores of Sakhmu, after which they return to their unblemished body and heal it back up to peak condition. And then they just live again. And a lot of you are asking yourselves, yeah, well, you know, maybe the body doesn't rot, but what if I cut it into little pieces? What if I burn the mummy to ashes? What if if I dissolve it in like an acid bath like they do in Breaking Bad, it couldn't return? Which, first of all, what are you, Pentex? What are you, a minion of Apophis? A servant of Oblivion? Why would you even want to know this information? But also, there is an official answer to this question in the rulebook, a maximum amount of damage that a mummy's corpse can take to prevent the spirit from restoring it. And it's ground zero on a nuclear explosion. That's right, the official, only sole way to permanently destroy a mummy's body is to drop a nuke right on its head and tear it apart at the atomic level. This right here, sort of nuclear shadow thing, is the amount of damage a mummy cannot restore. And even then, the spirit remains in the underworld. So say goodbye to your plans of burying the mummy in concrete or putting it on the bottom of the ocean floor, because the spirit is still around and it will take action to liberate its immortal, mortal shell. The reason they can do this is because their body and soul have been changed by something called the Spell of Life, one of the most powerful magic spells in the World of Darkness, and truly, truly ancient. It was created collaboratively by the prehistoric mages Isis and Thoth, which you may know as gods from Egyptian mythology, because this whole thing has a little bit of an Egypt theme going on if you haven't noticed, to restore to life the great and righteous pharaoh Osiris, who had been slain by his brother Set and cut up into little pieces. You see, Set was jealous of his righteous brother, his good brother, his fit-to-rule brother, his brother who, through his greatness, cuckolded him, actually. He did that. He fucked Set's wife and sister, by which I mean Osiris' sister, and Set's wife, same person, while married to his own sister. And it was consensual, okay, Nephthys actually wanted to fuck Osiris because he's such a good guy and Set is such, well, not that. Vengeful Set is in league with the primordial evil Apophis, the serpent that coils in the darkness, an aspect of the worm of oblivion. You might know Set, this guy, from Vampire the Masquerade, what with him being one of the antediluvian vampires that spawned one of the 13 clans, the Setites, the Ministry, the Snakes, the Corruptors, distrusted even by their fellow kindred and mortal enemies of the Mummies, as well as various types of werewolves and, well, really a lot of people. Very few people like them. So you might be thinking, huh, cool, vampires are of Set and mummies of Osiris, and this is the dichotomy. And that's all neat. But no, actually, this is World of Darkness. We are apocryphal and unreliable in this motherfucker. Get your sensitive ass back to YA urban fantasy. Because it turns out that before he was killed, Osiris was a vampire as well. What, you thought you could draw a direct Cain and Abel parallel? I'm sorry to disappoint you. During his reign as pharaoh, the court of Great Osiris was visited by a mysterious stranger who would only appear at night. He ate no food and drank no drink, and his skin was cool to the touch, like stone. He and wise Osiris would have long conversations about politics and philosophy in the pharaoh's private quarters. Probably also they were fucking, let's be real here. The stranger would visit the court every once in a while during his journeys and warn Osiris of an imminent threat, a great war looming on the horizon. Until suddenly, one night, he left, and Osiris was sick and desiccated, and seemed to die that very day, only to rise again in the night, forever changed. The name of this mysterious stranger? Typhon. Does that mean nothing to you? Because it means nothing to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who were very disappointed right then, because what? Who the fuck is Typhon? The truth is that no one knows who this ancient vampire was who embraced Osiris. Isis herself was convinced that Typhon was a pseudonym, though if she ever learned definitively who was behind it, we don't have access to that knowledge anymore. A common theory espoused by Isis herself is that it was actually his brother Set, who has used the name Typhon, and he even created a blood monster called the Typhonian Beast, in which case the whole story doesn't really add up that much, because it's not like Osiris was unaware that his brother had it out for him. It would lend credence to the fucking his sibling part, that seems pretty in character. Some say it was another antediluvian, my personal favorite candidates being Ventru and Saulot, perhaps Malkav. It may have been some unknown 14th antediluvian, there are sources that mention such a being. This whole thing might have happened before the flood, though this is unlikely, so he could be a vampire of the 3rd generation himself, or maybe an as yet unknown vampire of the 2nd generation, where it's well documented and known that Enoch, Zilla, and Irad were not the only ones. It might have been Cain himself, or going the other way, it might have been some Methuselah of one of the clans. Osiris even spawned his own bloodline, and here two of the disciplines are dominate and potence, which would hint at La Sombra, or perhaps at least Montano, the eldest child of the clan. But the problem with the children of Osiris is that they're like a group you get inducted into. That's sort of the main way they function as a bloodline. So they contain people from various clans, and their primogeniture is like extremely muddled. You can't really say that much based on it. Although this bloodline was recently released from their curse of vampirism by Osiris himself, and given the power to become mummies instead. There is another clan, well, bloodline, you can be embraced into as a kindred, already being a kindred, and that's the clan Bali, the demon worshippers. And Typhon is a figure that has some sort of position in their worldview, though nobody knows exactly who or what he is. He just appears in some texts. We can speculate a lot, but the point is nobody actually knows. There's a guy on the Cayman Islands of unknown primogeniture who also talks about Typhon a lot. It's World of Darkness. If all of that got you interested in vampires, I have a video that will explain Vampire the Masquerade to you as well. So back to Set having killed Osiris, cut his body up and strewn it all across the land. Isis and Nephthys put Osiris back together, except crucially they could not find his pingus, which Set apparently hid particularly well. for some reason, but they went ahead with the resurrection anyway. Long story short, Osiris returns, Set kills him again, and this time cuts him up into even more pieces. And though surely he could return to the lands of the living, Osiris accepts the gift of the throne of the underworld from Anubis. And so he sat down, a giant in his throne room, and stared into the void. That's what he continues to do still today. He just sits there, thinking, occasionally mumbling, and his closest and most trusted viziers try to interpret what he says while guarding his privacy. Sometimes he disappears unexpectedly and returns just as unexpectedly, never explaining himself or even acknowledging anyone's existence. They just open the door to the throne room sometimes and he ain't there. He's not as much of an absentee ruler over the Dark Kingdom of Sand as Charon is over the Dark Kingdom of Iron, but he's like not very directly involved. He's too busy contemplating. And really, who knows what he is contemplating? His viziers do often draw very wise insight from his mumblings. Indirectly, he has saved the Dark Kingdom of Sand many times, waging an internal war against the forces of Apophis. Serving him in the underworld and the world of the living is a vast apparatus dedicated to the shepherding of the souls of the deceased and the fight against Apophis. And at the heart of all that is the mummies, of which Horus is considered by many to be the first true mummy, even though Osiris was technically a mummy before him, and the first 42 mummies after Horus, they are his servants, the shemsu-heru. Their ranks have grown over time, as did the ranks of other factions within the court of the underworld and the mortal cults that persisted for millennia. Chief among them, the cult of Osiris and the cult of Isis, which are themselves not necessarily splintered, but certainly organized into specific factions with particular ideologies, often shaped by the worldly forces that have changed Egypt since the days of the ancient pharaohs. You know, like the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Ottomans, the British, who have their own factions and splinter groups all across the globe, some of which have shifted their primary focus away from caring for the reborn. And so the ancient mummies rose, died, and rose again, fighting the dark forces of Apophis. Occasionally new mummies would be made to bolster the ranks against the ever-growing army of darkness, but this was an extremely rare occurrence. They would sometimes lose people, especially when their souls were destroyed in some way, or they lost the will to exist over the millennia and just wanted to stay in the afterlife, or sometimes when their bodies were truly destroyed, maybe through magic. They haven't had nukes for that long. All of this was extremely rare. Mostly they needed to grow their numbers and stay connected to the current state of affairs. Though this came to an absolute crawl roughly around when Rome switched from republic to empire. The spell of life is an incredibly difficult and powerful piece of magic that requires excessively rare reagents and expertise. Mummies have always been rare for this reason, and also the reason that few proved themselves worthy of becoming one of the Reborn in the first place. The selection criteria are pretty tight. Some mummies lost their path. They abandoned the course of Osiris, made personified in the goddess Maat, and her 42 judges, one for each of the original mummies, enforcers of order and balance, which to me has always read as an aspect of the Weaver, though with greater focus on the positive elements of that particular force of the universe. Most of the renegades simply sought their own path, or even thought they could embody the cause of justice better that way. These are known as the Ishmaelites, after the first mummy who left the ranks of the shemsu-heru for this reason. I believe he was even one of the original 42, but I'm not sure. And then there's the fallen mummies, the corrupted mummies, who joined forces with Apophis by joining the ranks of the Apepnu, the Bane mummies, which are not exactly the same thing as mummies imbued with the spell of life. They're actually much closer to sort of being undead. But then, after millennia of slow stagnation and increasing isolation from the world of the living, the unthinkable happened. The summer of 1999. Okay, so look, thus far, we were doing the old lore of the original Mummy games. And this is still true, that's still the lore. Up to this point, You played as like a truly ancient, thousands and thousands of years old beings. And there was a thought in the development halls of White Wolf that really World of Darkness should be focused primarily on people that players can relate to. It's not a fantasy game. World of Darkness is fundamentally about grappling with the human experience. And what happened in the summer of 1999 provided a very convenient opportunity for the creators of Mummy to make a fundamental change to the nature of mummies. So what is it that happened in the summer of 1999? What didn't happen would be a better question to ask, as it was the culmination of the apocalyptic metaplot of various WoD game lines is what happened. The sixth great maelstrom, Charon doing battle with Godzilla in the Bay of Stygia, the Smiling Lord nuking the forgotten ruins of Kane's second city with the bombs America dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This because they were the memories of those bombs, because this is the underworld. A void engineer necromancer accidentally setting off a fusion device deep in the labyrinth of the underworld, near the very mouth of oblivion. The war between the Ravnos and the Quajian. The awakening of the antediluvian Zapatasura. The technocracy blasting northern India with space lasers. The ascension warrior crushing the very foundations of Dwasatep. The avatar storm sundering countless horizon realms, tearing apart the paths and spirits of the Umbra. In the ancient Egyptian part of the underworld, the Dark Kingdom of Sand, where the vast nothing manifests not as a storm-racked ocean, but a harsh and unforgiving desert, the maelstrom manifested itself as a sandstorm so powerful it would flay the ghostly flesh off your ghostly bones. The Mummies call this storm the Ja'ak, and that is the correct way of pronouncing it, by the way, because the correct way to pronounce any ancient language is when it sounds cool. The time before the Ja'ak was tumultuous, so unfortunately most mummies were dead, meaning like spiritually located in the underworld when it hit. And though it would take a nuke to destroy their bodies, well, the Ja'ak was essentially a nuke for their immortal soul. They were worn down, ripped to pieces, even the ones residing in Amenti, the sacred grounds of the underworld protected by Osiris and Anubis, the garden of recuperation where they would gather life force, was obliterated by the unrelenting storm. And I mean that, it is not relented to this day, it's the Ja'ak the Relentless, because it never relents. They had been eternal for thousands of years, but suddenly, over the course of a week, the overwhelming majority of mummies were utterly destroyed. Oh, well, you know, technically not utterly, actually, because what remains when the storm strips the flesh off your bones? The skeleton. A few of these ancient mummies, left exposed to the full brunt of the Ja'ak, were destroyed, yes. But for most of them, some small aspect, some sliver of their soul remained. To say they were a shadow of their former selves would be kind of an understatement, but these were ancient ghosts with immense power, purpose, and perseverance. They couldn't reanimate their old bodies, but luckily, this disaster is what snapped Osiris out of his fixation momentarily, long enough to gift to his followers a new and improved version of the Spell of Life. He even went to the mortal world for a while to update his wayward priests. A Spell of Life which would allow his old servants to exist again. With the help of mortal cults and on their own initiative, these shredded souls would seek mortals beyond the shroud, mortals with great potential, but which were in some fundamental way broken, and who would die before their time. In melding with them, a new, stronger breed of mummy would rise again. They became known as the Amenti, named in honor of the sacred site of recuperation for mummies that had been destroyed by the Ja'ak. You may have figured it out by now, but this is the big change in the new edition of Mummy. It used to be you would play as ancient mummies, now you are modern people with a soul fragment of an ancient mummy inside them. Not all the ancient mummies have disappeared, of course. Some people had characters from old editions they wanted to continue playing. And though of course it was interesting to see an old character meld with a new one, not every everyone wanted to see that, and so the game was mired in a little bit of controversy. It was one of the great markers of the turning point in World of Darkness, where it really started to focus on street-level games as opposed to grand interdimensional plots involving gods behind every door. But I have to admit that it does feel a little weird to think that like all of the mummies, really a type of creature that feels truly, genuinely ancient, more so than most supernatural creatures, were pretty much born after the year 2000. They're born for the third time, but you know. Let's say I understand the urge to think, oh well, this is my World of Darkness though, and perhaps I want to go with a different turn of events. What I like is that this new and improved spell of life has actually been around for almost 1,000 years, maybe even longer, and every once in a while, just as like a consequence of statistics, a mummy was destroyed by the Tempest in the underworld, leaving behind only a fragment. It's not the first great maelstrom either, as you might have surmised from the fact that it's called the 6th great maelstrom. And when the Ja'ak hit, that just happened a lot. But they've been able to just like slot the fragment into a mortal and make them into a new mummy for a while now. This isn't actually official canon, but you can make it so. It's fine, trust me. Of course, the rebirth is not as easy as just slotting a soul fragment in, but in fact a very dangerous and excruciating process. Soul fragments are vulnerable in the underworld, especially with echoes of the Ja'ak still whipping across the Forgotten Sands. And now they have to seek out eligible souls far and wide and lie in wait beyond the shroud, anticipating their untimely death, which may not even happen. Some of the less scrupulous soul fragments might be tempted to expedite that process. They're gonna be immortal anyway. The person in question is, as I said, always someone who tragically failed to meet their potential. Someone who was lacking what some might call a part of their soul, which made their life miserable. At the moment of their death, like all ghosts, they enter the underworld, cocooned by a caul, a membrane that shields them from the ravages of the Shadowlands and keeps them in a sort of timeless trance. Normally, after some time, a Reaper would find them, tear open that caul, and well, what happens next depends on the Reaper, really. What happens instead is that the soul fragment is already there, in the caul, with the freshly deceased, disturbing their rest. Imagine you die, and like before you can even process what happened, the first thing you see is like a tattered corpse looming over you, explaining to you in a raspy voice, in an ancient language that you somehow understand, that you just died. But if you let it, it can help you. It can restore you to life, and not only that, it can give you everlasting life. You'd think most people would say yes, but you know, that kind of scenario can feel like a bit of a trap to many as well. It's a deal that's too good to be true. But it is true, and if you consent, and consent is strictly necessary for this to work, there's really nothing else you need to do. Well, except for experiencing a moment of unspeakable agony as the ancient soul fragment melds with your own soul and replaces the part of your soul that was broken. That's an excruciating experience, the likes of which you've never felt. And this is considering that maybe you just died in an unreasonably painful manner. From that agony, you drift back into a feverish trance, and the soul fragment of the ancient mummy takes over your body, mending the roughest wounds, but still leaving it in a corpse-like state. Thus begins the Hajj. The Hajj, named after the spiritual pilgrimage every able-bodied Muslim makes to Mecca at some point in their life, is the journey the mummy makes from wherever it is in the world into the so-called Web of Faith, which to amateurs like us is known as the Middle East. The Web of Faith is a key component in this new spell of life, and it's an actual metaphysical structure created and maintained in the Umbra by the magical tradition known as the Al-Ibatin, essentially medieval Arabic math mages, to channel and reinforce the mystical energies of a fairly large geographical region stretching from Greece to Oman and Iran to Tunisia. It is the birthplace of all three of the major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, home to most of their holy sites, as well as other important religions such as the Zoroastrians. Zoroastrianism is also from there. And also ancient religions that are mostly extinct today but still fascinate us, like ancient Greek and Egyptian faiths. There is immense power in such faith and fascination that mages can tap, and if you do want to find out more about mages, you can check out my video on Mage the Ascension. Osiris, and more importantly the multiple cults of mages that follow his magical tradition, can tap that too. The energy, I mean, that's what they're tapping. It's the Sekhem. Sekhem Majongus, am I right? Please join my Patreon. This is all I can do. This is my talent. There's really mediocre benefits, but you will see me making more jokes like that. I will fight for you. The problem is that many of these old mummies have not been in the world of the living for quite some time, often because they had important stuff to do in the underworld, or because their quests were taking place far outside human society. Many of those who did stick around often sort of stopped keeping up with the trends after a while, especially in recent centuries when everything changed so very abruptly. I mean, did you hear that they found a whole nother continent? And then they're using coal to make metal machines move? And then the next thing you know, you got guys on the moon? Up there in the sky? That fucking moon? That actually happened so very quickly, by the way. I'm always fascinated by the fact that humans tried to conquer flight for like 10,000 years. And then suddenly the young children who saw the first airplane take to the sky became the old people who saw the first humans land on the moon. But the mummies were like, "Hey, Maron, I'm fighting the forces of Apophis over here. I don't have time to keep up with all this." Luckily, the mortal cults built around the existence of mummies have set up an elaborate infrastructure to help mummies on Hajj get to the web of faith, especially if they're overseas and unfamiliar with the intricacies of global air travel. Unfortunately, the followers of Apophis also know about this step in the spell of life, so they work hard at snatching the mummies off before the cults of Isis, Horus, and Osiris can. And because these cults conveniently don't always trust each other, they often get ample opportunity to snatch a nascent immortal and spirit them away in hopes of corrupting them. And if that doesn't work, time is on their side, because if the Hajj is not completed within 70 days, it will be too late, and the mummy will just become a walking corpse that slowly disintegrates. I did the math, by the way, and from like where I live in northern Germany, you could like easily make it. It's like not just to the Web of Faith, but to Cairo, to Osiris's personal house in 70 days, no problem. On foot, no issue. At least if you're an animated corpse that doesn't need to breathe, eat, or rest. All of Europe is in that radius. In Asia, it reaches all the way to Thailand. From Africa, you could be as far south as Zimbabwe. And this is considering only the pedestrian option, so it's very much doable. Once in the Web of Faith, the mummy's usually snatched up by one of the cults and prepared for the spell of life itself, when the spirit fragment and the mortal soul are finally fused completely, to emerge as a whole new person into the third life. The first life being the life of the original mummy, the mortal life, the second life being the mortal existence of the modern person, and then now the third life being the rebirth as an Amenti. But before that can truly happen, the death must be completed. The newly forged soul must go to the dark kingdom of sand, or what is left of it, and be guided by Anubis through the terrible sandstorms. There they will come to a circuit, the 42 judges of Maat, who will evaluate and adjudicate the soul, punish it for its misdeeds, reward it for its virtues, and determine how good it has been at furthering and preserving balance. And this doesn't just happen once. In fact, out of leniency for the newly created soul, the first time around, the judges will be like the least harsh. The Reborn must stand trial for their deeds after every life they live, before they are permitted to rest in the gardens of Amenti to recharge their Sekhem. Only after that is completed and the soul is returned to the body, the Amenti is truly created. Much like we think of the physical body as having different components today, like I'm talking about, organs, regions of the body like this the head area. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was made of 5 components known as tem-ak. So naturally there are 6 types of mummy, because of course there fucking are. Nothing is ever simple with these people. The 5 pieces of the soul are the Ka, guardian of the body, the Ba, which travels the underworld, the Sahu, the unchangeable and eternal core of the soul, the Ku, which bridges the gap between life and death, and the Kaibit, the seat of drive and passion. And you might be asking yourself, hang on, why do Egyptian dead get different body parts, but European ones are just wraiths? Is there really more to the Egyptian dead? No, it's entirely a matter of perspective. In the Western tradition, we perceive these as aspects of the singular wraith that are nonetheless a whole, whereas the Egyptian tradition sees them through a more separate lens, which does allow them to sort of make use and have a greater control over parts of themselves that Western wraiths tend to ignore. The Ka is the spiritual residue the living leave on their corpses, the memory of life that a necromancer might use to animate the undead into a walking corpse with, or which a medium might read information from, that's still like stuck in the once living body. The Ba is the psyche, what we think of as the mind that has conscious thought, sort of the entirety of the wraith in Western tradition almost. The Saho is the fact that the soul is immortal, the core of the being, the seat of an inalienable identity which we think of existing in conjunction with the Ba as an inseparable unit. The Ku is the core, the ectoplasmic cocoon that wraiths appear in when they enter the underworld. The Kaibit is what wraiths call the shadow, the darker self driven by passions, which wraiths often do experience as a separate part of themselves and which has the power to act independently, though in the Egyptian context, the connotation of the Kaibit is a little more ambiguous. It's not necessarily always and exclusively a force of corruption and evil, it's more of a Freudian id. One of these is left over from each of the ancient mummies, and one of these is broken in each of the mortals that are to become new mummies, thus creating 5 different types of mummy, known as dynasties, that are subtly different from each other. They are sort of the clans of the mummy world. And also there's a 6th one. You just have to accept that. I have accepted it. The Kher-minu, also known as the Tomb Watchers, are created from Ka tem-ak. It is the purpose of Ka to safeguard and protect the body, so the mortals they seek are those who treat their bodies poorly, because they do not see the value and beauty they bear in them. People who never work out, who have eating disorders, who do hard drugs to excess, who engage in other forms of self-harm, or people who simply do not see themselves as they truly are, which is among the most lethal of psychological conditions. Kher-minu have a reputation for being rather superficial. They place great value on physical appearance or the potential of getting there. So they usually choose beautiful people who didn't properly manage that beauty in life. If they died with their bodies in a state of severe disrepair, say from like having effectively eaten themselves to death, once rebirth comes, the newly created Kher-minu will work hard on diet and exercise, and it will be easy for them to do so because the part that was once lacking in the mortal soul is now replaced with the part of the soul that was strongest in the ancient mummy. As a consequence, the Kher-minu place their own haleness in high regard. Self-preservation is their highest ideal, and they not only acquire all manner of skills and goods to protect themselves, but they're also cautious. Some might say conservative, preferring to play it safe over taking the road that'll place them in harm's way. Some see this attitude as rather selfish, but to the Kher-minu it is born of the fact that, immortal or not, they consider life inherently valuable and worthy of care in order to preserve it and the things that happen because of it. They tend to choose sedentary lives dedicated to the preservation of certain people and places, institutions. So you may find them working as museum curators, graveyard keepers, social workers, lifestyle coaches, medical doctors, even hotel owners and janitors. That may sound rather dull, but they are still equipped with knowledge and abilities that allow them to face great threats, often of a supernatural variety. The people and places they take care of are often important to the supernatural agendas of mummies. In a military sense, you might say they maintain the fallback position that other, more frontline fighting agents of Ma'at retreat to when they need to recuperate, as well as those who defend their essential strategic assets. Which is also the point when they do become willing to endanger themselves, because they understand that self-preservation is easier for them than it is for many of the things they are working to protect. Their purpose gives them a special power, the shielding self, which allows them to subtly influence fate in order to make it so circumstances align in a way that makes it harder for their opponents to harm or kill them. Gun jams, momentary distractions, an opportune gust of wind that stops them from falling off the cliff, that kind of thing. They also have a liability, which naturally is the fact that they sometimes cannot endanger themselves even when they want to, and when it would be the best course of action. Their instincts just get in the way sometimes. The Kher-minu Hekau affinity is for amulets, which again we will talk about later. Each dynasty also has a special power that helps them on the Hajj, and for the Kher-minu it's the fact that their proximity to the world of the living means they can communicate simple concepts in various modern languages, which can make the journey a whole lot easier. Some example Kher-minu might be a former homeless meth addict who now uses his survival and street skills to rescue the unhoused from dangerous environmental conditions and brings them to his homeless shelter, where he also offers drug counseling. Or perhaps a supermodel who starved herself to death to deal with the pressures of the profession and now lives a life in a large house in the countryside where she shelters victims of spousal abuse and various other identity-related problems, and also fellow mummies who are being hunted by the forces of Apophis. Could also be a soldier who always wanted to protect everyone but himself, and that ended up getting him killed. Now he trains the soldiers of Ma'at, most of them not even mummies, in tactics and strategy that will allow them to operate effectively and without risking unnecessary losses. The Khri-habi, also known as the Scroll Bearers, are created from Ba Temak. The Ba is the conscious mind, the seat of thought and decision-making, so the mortals they seek are those who had a hard time thinking for themselves, whose thoughts and actions were governed by others instead of their authentic wishes. Dogmatists, religious extremists, those who were unshakably stubborn in their beliefs, unable to examine and introspect their thought patterns, or who just wanted a simple set of ideals to follow self-righteously and without the need to think for themselves. Often they died for a cause they never even fully considered. Consequently, Khri-habi have a reputation of being unruly in a high intellectual sense. They have a need to question and understand things so they can make sure they are pursuing balance and not just someone's agenda. They're hard to fool and resent the attempt. There's often a difficult process of self-examination early into a Khri-habi's immortal life, where their previous narrow-minded dogmas and treasured beliefs are turned on their head and critically examined, often resulting in a completely different worldview than what they used to believe. Such people often avoided education, and now they crave knowledge as the key to possessing your own mind, the vehicle of freedom in their own head. Khri-habi are intellectuals by nature, active thinkers and planners who devise schemes and implement them. They like to have something to do, and they prefer to be in positions of status because it allows them to get those things done. They're not particularly fond of chaos and prefer to act as administrators, accountants, scientists, advisors, engineers, architects, and troubleshooters, counselors that help people find a sense of direction in life, anywhere they can bring clarity into the world and help people be their best selves. Within mummy society, they're often deeply embedded in the cults and offices necessary to keep it all running and to take the fight to Apophis and his minions. Given that they often rise to occupy positions of high attainment in the mortal world, they need to master the challenge of balancing those duties with the duties in their supernatural life. Unfortunately, as I keep being reminded of as well, there are only so many hours in a day, which is why Khri-habi love to build strong teams that allow them to delegate to agents whose competency they have cultivated. Their purpose as travelers of the underworld, and therein collectors of the life energy that sustains mummies, gives them a gift called Spirit Self, which allows them to draw upon the life energy in the Umbra every morning to heal their physical form and or the form of another, so they can maintain a high-intensity lifestyle without needing to worry too much about long-term health damage. Unfortunately, the Khri-habi is also part of a mind that has spent most of its existence in a state of mental sluggishness, and that intellectual baggage is seldom fully shed. Old reflexes of judgment and obedience remain, and often interfere with their ability to take in the world for what it is and analyze a situation quickly. They need to take their time to think, and when time is of the essence, that can be difficult. The Khri-habi Hekau affinity is for alchemy, reflecting their mental flexibility. On the Hajj, the Ba spirit has the advantage of being the only type of Tem-ak entirely clear-headed and able to make rational decisions. Even in a world it does not understand, it can form a coherent plan and not just act mostly on instinct. Some example Khri-habi characters might be an accountant for a big corporate enterprise engaged in tax avoidance for an utterly horrid oil company, without questioning why, but who is now using her skills as a forensic accountant trying to track down suspicious flows of money, especially those financing the servants of Apophis. Or it might be a guy in the mafia, a thug, a killer, born into that life and never questioning the principles of omerta and absolute loyalty to the boss and the family, who was betrayed and has since become a general in the war against those who would take from those weaker than them. Or maybe a deeply conservative, religious extremist who found fervor in some like Southern Baptist cult and spent her weekends going to anti-abortion rallies and sending threatening emails to LGBTQ+ groups, now regretting her past closed-mindedness and becoming an ardent feminist trying to use her eternity to implement meaningful structural change. The Mesektet, also known as the Night Sons, are created from Sahu Temak. The Sahu is the seat of mortality, the subconscious soul, the spine of the spirit that binds all the other parts together as an inalienable sense of self, the vessel that sort of holds the character traits that make up who we are at the core of our being. Among dying mortals, it seeks out those lacking in moral fiber, manipulative opportunists, criminals of every variety, traitors for the sake of personal gain, cheaters and disloyal spouses, grifters who constructed elaborate lies, or simply those who loved to deceive for no other reason than their own personal amusement. The Mesektet recognize Osiris, Horus, and Isis as central to their worldview and existence, but are primarily dedicated to the sun god Ra, whose light and superior position high up in the sky reveals all truth, and who is only impressed by those of impeccable moral character. These mummies often spend their lives trying to right the wrongs they have committed, atone for their sins in a poetic way, something that counterbalances the sort of bad stuff they once did. A scam artist now goes around holding free seminars that teaches people how not to get scammed. A cover-up engineer now exposes the sorts of scandals they used to make disappear for the elite, that sort of thing. Much more frequently, though, they seek to fix things they broke, which is often hard if not impossible, not simply because it's easier to tear something down than it is to build it, but also because some things just cannot be fixed. In the long term, Mesektet are among the fiercest warriors against the forces of Apophis, the corrupter, the deceiver. They are privy to greater truths about the future than others, but know that they must bring about the revelation of these truths organically. They can't just be a prophet speaking on the hill. They're drawn to professions that uncover truth, like journalism or detective work, whether private or for the police, though those fields are often packed with veils and deception themselves. They might attach themselves to honest political candidates and organize for them, become firebrand civil rights lawyers, and because of their past lives, they are cunning and clever in these new callings. Among mummies, the Mesektet are often arbitrators and justicars, as well as watchers of fate who stand out on the cliff to see the patterns in the sky. They want mummies to be pure of spirit and ready to fight Apophis, but their standards of morality can at times be a little too exalted. Their purpose, the eternal self, makes them especially attuned to the movements of fate, and they're gifted with a unique foresight that allows them to see meaningful patterns where others just see noise. They can divine information about the future and the truth this way, so catching a Mesektet unprepared is a rare occurrence. Unfortunately, their connection to Ra gives them a liability that makes them sort of anti-vampires, right? When the sun goes down, they become immediately exhausted and must rest. They don't fall into like a sort of stasis, but they become very tired and out of sorts. The Mesektet Hekau affinity is for celestial, since they are associated with the sun. And unfortunately, on the Hajj, while they do receive helpful portents, they also can't do the thing where they just like trudge through day and night, but need to rest when the sun is down, which can delay their journey quite a bit. Some example Mesektet could be a confidence man who preyed on the elderly and stole more than one family fortune, now attempting to balance an investment portfolio powered by fate reading with anonymity and morality so he can repay the descendants of those people. Maybe a police attorney tasked with defending murderous cops in court, who spent her time finding ways to cast doubt on all the evidence, no matter how strong, is now using her knowledge and every trick in the book to prosecute those corrupt cops instead. Or it could be a career politician who pretended to be a progressive but sold out to the corporate machine immediately. Unfortunately, his death was rather public, so he can't simply make amends directly now. However, he did compile folders of dirt on his patrons and colleagues, and he's finding ways to sort of most effectively leak every single one of those secrets. The Sakhmu, also known as the Spirit Scepters, are created from ku-temak. The ku is the caul, the protective cocoon that envelops the freshly deceased and allows it respite, protecting it from the ravages of the underworld. It's also a vehicle, a gateway between realities, the connection between the mundane and the supernatural. Ku fragments seek mortals whose spiritual and creative sensibilities are dysfunctional and who tried desperately to fill that hole, pursuing anything and everything that proclaimed itself to be a greater truth. They led lives unable to find purpose, but working themselves rugged in the pursuit of it. In their new life, the young Sakhmu are finally connected to the sublime. They see all those things they used to not see, the uncreated, the possible, the interconnectedness, the meaningful spaces between things. Their spiritual third eye is awakened, and their creative spark is ignited. They finally understand that the things they were doing before, the pursuits of personal glory, the vanity, were as meaningless as they secretly feared. But that's okay, because they can find their own meaning now. Ironically, giving all that pointless struggle meaning in the third life. Many of the Reborn were not particularly high achievers in their mortal lives, but the Sakhmu often were, because they were trying to emulate having fulfillment in their lives in hopes of achieving it that way. They're business executives, cult leaders, talent managers, and ironically, many of them pull back from the things that brought them such success. Even though they have a high technical skill, the meaning they now pursue potentially lies elsewhere. A rethinking is in order, and that can take a while. But ultimately it becomes worth being a philanthropist, a spiritual guru, or experimental musician. There's a lot of doing good involved. The focus of those things is often to create and inspire others to do so. The Sakhmu are not about like basic needs, they're about self-fulfillment. Among mummies, they have the easiest time functioning as mediums between the worlds, but many also take the role of inspiring and fortifying the belief of their fellow mummies, helping them with their own inner balance in their quest for Ma'at. Their purpose is the shining self, the ability to create a truly inspired thing of fantastic quality. These things needn't be material objects, they can also be projects that are themselves the final product, so long as there is some element of genuine craftsmanship and artistry to them. On the other hand, being a gateway into the divine world makes you shine. So the Sakhmu stand out wherever they go and have a difficult time blending in, not just because others often consider them odd, but because it shines through them so strongly that even the most spiritually dead people can perceive it. They catch the attention of random people on the street looking for someone to let their anger out on, and will often be spotted when they're trying to get away with some minor infraction. The Sakhmu Hekau affinity is for effigy, the art of identity making. On the Hajj, they shine by bringing the walking corpse to a superior facsimile of life. They may not be able to speak modern languages or drive a car, but no one who sees them will think that they're some sort of like weirdo or like sick or god forbid like a zombie. They can blend in very effectively, hiding from the agents of Apophis and all those who would unwittingly do his bidding. A few ideas for Sakhmu characters include the middle-aged middle manager trapped in a loveless marriage who suddenly begins rising through the ranks by venturing into interesting new projects that do wonders for the corporation's financial and social portfolio. The greasy-haired tech support guy who sort of laments that his computer science degree didn't get him anywhere and kills himself drunk one night by stumbling off the bridge half by accident, only to return from his unexpected absence a master of software engineering, dedicated to writing the most elegant code you've ever seen. Or there could be a stage magician playing old folks' homes up and down the East Coast, just, going through the motions with tricks she copied off her betters a decade ago. She played Vegas once, but it got her nowhere. Now she no longer wants to, and dazzles with creative performances that soon put her back in the trade papers. But she only does that for the people who really get joy from that sort of thing. The Sefekhi, also known as the unbandaged ones, are created from Kaibit Temak. The Kaibit actually does have a direct analog, if you will, in the Western system of Wraith classification. It's the shadow, the darker self, the seat of aggression, rage, and volatility. It is perhaps a little different given that the shadow of a Wraith tends to always act in service of oblivion, which in this context would be Apophis, but that may well be because we lack nuance in how we see it. The Kaibit seeks out people who were lacking in drive and passion, unable to pursue the things they desired, habitual self-flagellants who never managed to stand up for themselves and fight back against those who decided to just take what they wanted from them. People so worried about being the villain, they never managed to be anything other than a victim. These Reborn often not only have a hard time melding with the Kaibit, but also adapting to these new violent and driven impulses they now carry within themselves. Many of them were pacifists, not out of conviction, but frailty. So they never learned to control these tendencies. Which is a problem because the Kaibit, more than any other Temak, has a tendency to sort of spiral out of balance a little bit. To channel this power, these new Reborn need to become warriors. And in that process, they tend to become detached from mortal and even Amenti society. They are on a mission. They know they will be judged, and they know they have allies in their purpose, but the purpose they pursue is itself often destructive. It's wielded in the name of Ma'at, but it's nonetheless a path of war. They don't even mix well with other mummies who are like do-gooders and miracle workers. The Sefekhi are assassins and mercenaries. They don't always kill, but the things they do tend to involve a lot of violence, which may lead you to think, hey, this is kind of the only interesting dynasty of mummy because they're the only ones using their eternal life to do like cool action shit, I suppose. And I think to nerf that like mindset a little bit, the writers decided to make it so that they have their genitals removed before the spell of life is enacted upon them, and also there's ritual scarring across their bodies. This sort of ritual gelding is meant to control the dark impulses of the shadow, and also honor the fact that Set cut Osiris into pieces and scattered him across the land. And, the one thing they never found was his magnum dong. We've been over this. Their purpose is the shadow, which imbues them with an unstoppable drive that allows them to persevere through the pain of even the most debilitating injuries. A bear trap can crush their leg, they can lose half their blood in their body, they can be stranded in the middle of nowhere, all their fingers broken, with a brutal migraine, fighting poison, and they will just keep on going. The corresponding liability is that they radiate barely restrained violence, and everyone they interact with can feel it. people instinctively distrust Sefekhi. The Sefekhi Hekau affinity is for necromancy, which I reckon is rather self-explanatory. On the Hajj, the Kaibit strengthens the walking corpse of the mortal, not only by making it more powerful, but harder to destroy. They do, however, also have a very short fuse and don't deal well with frustration, meaning they usually leave behind a path of destruction that's pretty easy to follow. A few basic Sefekhi characters might include a meek and mouse-like monk who joined a monastery in hopes of avoiding all the meanness in the world, but who was bullied there as well. Because he's still not exactly a physical exemplar, he uses stealth and subterfuge to kill the enemies of Ma'at. But he still can't quite deal with the guilt of being a murderer. A woman from the most conservative corner of Alabama who was abused by her husband and genuinely believed that she deserved it for disobeying him until one day he murdered her. Happens every day. Now she hunts domestic abusers without mercy, to the point that even the judges of Ma'at castigate her whenever she returns to the lands of the dead. A man who was reluctant to join the army, but who had to because he needed the money, who saw the horrors of war overseas, unable to lift a finger to help the civilians his buddies murdered, who ended up with a medical discharge and drank himself to death back home. He's made the Geneva Convention his personal mission, finding all those cruel sociopaths who violate its tenets to give them a taste of their own medicine. The Udja-sen, also known as the Judged Ones, are the 6th of the 5 dynasties of the Amenti and are not created of any one particular type of Tem-ak. Instead, they are what happens when something is just fundamentally wrong with the merging. The newly created soul in the spell of life is found lacking by the judges of Ma'at. Maybe it wasn't just one part of the mortal soul that was broken and the Tem-ak couldn't make up for all of it. Maybe the Tem-ak replaced the wrong part of the soul because it was desperate to be alive again. Maybe the Tem-ak itself was barely coherent anymore. There's really any number of reasons why the judges might look at an emerging reborn on their first journey to the underworld and deem them unworthy of the honor of becoming a mummy. Back in the day, they would have just cast their soul to Amit and, it would have consumed it. The Oblivion would have eaten that shit. But times are tough and the office fridge in the Dark Kingdom of Sand only has off-brand sodas in it now, so Instead, they reshape the soul, making it pliable, stretching and bending all its parts, but especially the Tem-ak, to stuff all the cracks and fill all the holes, removing it from the original purpose and completely wiping its ancient identity. As a result, the Udja-sen have no or only extremely fragmentary memories from their second life, and no guiding force inside them that will help them on their path of Ma'at. Many of them don't even see any point in serving Osiris, much like a regular modern person would not see a point in serving an ancient god. And while they are probably decent people, just as anyone is, they don't feel particularly drawn to any one philosophy. They are depressed and alienated, though other mummies don't distrust them the way they might the Sefekhi. They are met with pity instead, seen as somewhat lesser, which to many is even more of a nightmare, but also sometimes there's admiration. To be granted rebirth and immortality without purpose is a heavy burden to carry, but it opens up the possibility of finding your own purpose and the freedom to find your way to serve Ma'at or some other abstraction of the forces of good. Of course, many Udja-sen lose their path altogether and fall to Apophis, but it's not as many as you might expect actually. Though they have no purpose, it is precisely the lack thereof that opens them up to the possibility of encountering life force that isn't strictly Sekhem flavored. The Web of Faith gives mummies a daily dose of Sekhem, but outside it they need to find other sources. The Udja-sen are much more attuned to the fundamental forces of life and can find and absorb the equivalent of Sekhem wherever they go in the world. This is why they're the most common type of mummy outside the Web of Faith. However, as a liability, their deformed and repaired souls leak, so any expenditure of Sekhem also does them physical harm. It's not a lot, and it's usually worth it, but it's something to keep in mind. As for Hekau, they have no particular affinity, just as they have no particular advantage on the Hajj, because they start out as having a particular Tem-ak, and then that's the thing that defines their Hajj. Example Udja-sen characters include a vile and psychopathic child killer who used to work as a nurse in a children's hospital, chosen by an overly forgiving Sahu who felt she was just misunderstood, and who now wanders the world, cured of her insanity, but laden with the guilt of her actions. An ordinary seeming man who always bent with the wind like a reed and let everyone walk all over his boundaries, sought out by a kaibit in his untimely demise, only for the judges to discover that he was harboring wild fantasies of vengeance that he would now, as an immortal, indulge in. So obviously they wanted to avoid a sort of immortal Lester Nygaard situation. A person of enormous beauty and charm that had a few bad habits but wasn't actively destroying her body. But a Ka was so enamored with her, wanting to be her and preserve her so much that it tried to fix what wasn't broken and thus squeezed the whole soul out of shape, causing cracks and fissures where there were none before. Now you may think that all sounds very cool, and you are correct, it does, but the supernatural powers of these mummies might strike you as not particularly impressive. Still cool, but very much human. Where is the magic that I mentioned, right? Well, it's in the Hekau, the words of power, an ancient Egyptian magical tradition that has survived into the modern age through the ancient cults and eternal mummies. The thing you need to understand about Hekau is that it's not magic inherent to mummies by nature of them being mummies. It's more a type of sorcery that they learn to utilize, and that non-mummies who understand its secrets can theoretically invoke as well. It's not a supernatural ability or, God forbid, dynamic magic. And if that doesn't mean anything to you or not make sense at all, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter to your existence as a mummy. Mages need to worry about that sort of distinction, but you are going to be fine. What matters is that Hekau is not like a werewolf gift or a vampiric discipline. It's secret knowledge that mummies have access to and which non-mummy practitioners can and do utilize. It's just that, the secret knowledge being secret knowledge, they don't know about it. However, the spells and rituals of Hekau have, over the millennia, become focused entirely around mummies, their lifestyle, and the innate supernatural abilities they do possess that make this sort of sorcery much easier for them. Like the fact that they can channel Sekhem, life force, which mages would refer to as quintessence, which most mortal sorcerers cannot do with nearly the same ease that mummies can. This is not dissimilar to how vampires use their blood in blood sorcery, though it's even easier for mummies. And also, being a mummy is a concept baked into the essence of Hekau as a sorceress tradition, so anyone who isn't a mummy does it in spite of not being one. There are 6 paths of Hekau, not actually one for each dynasty, but 5 for 5 of the dynasties, and then there's a 6th path and a 6th dynasty, but then they're not connected. You might remember the Udja-sen from 2 minutes ago. They don't have a particular talent for any one path of the Hekau. Any mummy can learn any path, and most do have knowledge of several paths, but they tend to specialize at least a little bit. Alchemy may strike you as rather a medieval thing, but as with many medieval things, especially when it comes to magic, it derives its origins from antiquity and specifically ancient Egypt. In fact, the word alchemy derives from the Arabic and Egyptian al-Kem, which means the Black Land and refers specifically to the lands of the Lower Nile, though this is just one of the several etymologies that are possible for the term, but it's probably the one that's the truest. It is the primary domain of the Khri-habi, the scroll bearers, who use it to prepare potions, salves, and decoctions infused with the attributes they desire to invoke or strengthen. It's not a particularly metaphysical practice. It's about manipulating the paradigms of the real world, switching aspects of physical things with different ones, or raising the potency of those attributes by distillation. Effects achieved by alchemy are often about healing, poisoning, endowing with certain characteristics that make you better at a skill, boosting all manner of attributes in a character sense, identifying and transmutating substances, and storing Sakhmu. Among the most powerful feats of this path are blanket attribute increases to genuinely superhuman levels for extended periods of time, physical nigh invulnerability, and a potion that can heal almost any disease instantly. Amulets are not just about jewelry, though because of both the impractical significance and quality of materials involved, that is exactly what they often end up being. Like alchemical concoctions, amulets can be used by anyone who isn't undead, though they are a lot more subtle, right? It's a lot easier to give someone a nice necklace and ask them to wear it than to force them to drink some stinky potion. It is the primary domain of the Kher-minu, the Tomb Watchers, who use it to enchant objects to give them supernatural abilities, not necessarily making those objects themselves, though the two do often go hand in hand. It's about stitching together the mundane and the sublime, creating conduits between the worlds, and reveling in symbolism. There is an aspect of beauty and aesthetics to it that suits the Tomb Watchers a lot. Effects achieved by amulets are often about warding and protection, blessing with good fortune, focusing Sakhmu, conferring unusual abilities like flight or clairvoyance, enhancing social attributes, or protecting bodies of dead mummies while at rest. Among the most powerful feats of this path are gaining complete immunity to all but the most powerful harmful magic, redirecting spiritual damage to a physical body that is much more easily healed, healing even the most lethal injuries, and making magical effects eternal. Celestial is about the sky and the heavens, the glory of Ra, including both the weather and the movement of the stars, offering prophetic visions of past, present, and future. These rituals tend to require much effort, but create pretty grand and momentous effects. Plus, you get to work outside, which for a lot of people is a big plus. They love that. It is the primary domain of the Mesektet, the Night Sons, who use it to divine information about the enemies of Ra and bring nourishing rain to their allies, as well as harrowing storms to their foes. It's pretty much entirely concerned with the beyond. Very little about it has much to do with the mundane world, though the effects of the beyond often rain down upon the mundane world, literally, because you can make it rain with this. It's a bit more specialized than other Hekau traditions, though that doesn't mean it still isn't very versatile. Effects achieved by Celestial are often about prophecy and the learning of information, of perception on a higher level, timing and planning, weather manipulation, calling forth sunlight at any time, and by this I mean like real sunlight that can actually hurt vampires. There is a spell that cloaks you in literal sunlight that will hurt vampires. Among the most powerful effects of Celestial are calling down elements of godhood into oneself and bringing forth mythological plagues and other freak weather and/or earthquakes. Or obviously, because the earth and the sky are linked. Effigy is about recreating and imbuing the power of symbols and representations, metaphor and analogy. Much of the style of ancient Egypt, and really many cultures, it's a pretty common theme, was full of references to their spiritual beliefs in like the shapes and decorations from a very basal level up. With effigy, we take these representations and make them true, infusing the inanimate with magic and life. It is the primary domain of the Sakhmu, the spirit scepters, who here combine artistry with literal creation, because effigy usually brings things into existence and animates them. It shapes the mundane into the sublime, if you will, the most iconic presentation of which is the Ushapti, a sort of ancient Egyptian golem servant created to perform a variety of tasks and famous as those stone statues that defend tombs and temples that come to life and they fight against the intruders. Effects achieved by effigy are attunement to tools and other inanimate objects to better work with them, deactivating and taking over animate constructs, creating artifacts in the underworld, and of course creating an endless variety of Ushapti. Among the most powerful effects of effigy are the creation of a lifelike, effigy that the mummy's soul can inhabit even when it's dead and run around in like a robot. You can fully controlling a person through control of a representation of them, that's also something you can do. And linking entire cargo cruises to the underworld so they can be immaterially manned by ghosts. Necromancy is about harnessing the powers of death and entropy, unleashing the powers of life in the underworld and bringing those powers into the world of flesh. Outside of mummy circles, and to a much smaller extent even in mummy circles, necromancy has a moderately sinister reputation. It's certainly a useful tool and an important metaphysical element that represents the necessary force of death and purification, but you can get up to some pretty destructive shenanigans with it. It is, however, not considered like a dark art in any capacity, the way that it would be seen in the West. It is the primary domain of the Sefekhi, the unbandaged ones, who, being animated by their shadow, are of course the most attuned to the powers of oblivion, and, let's be serious here, Apophis. They sort of use darkness's own tools against it. Like Celestial, its concern also lies entirely beyond the mortal world, but in a completely different direction. It's about abstract values like respect, honor for the dead and the dying, and mostly helps characters while they are located in the otherworld. Effects achieved by necromancy revolve around hardening both the corpse and the spirit of a mummy against harm, safely navigating the many hazards of the underworld, interacting with the underworld while in the world of the living, staving off the Ja'ak, and of course, animating the dead. Among the most powerful feats of necromancy is to rip someone's shadow out of their soul, cleansing them from its pull, reprogramming ghosts entirely, creating a sort of phylactery as like an extra backup for your body, and completely driving corruption and death from a person or place. Nomenclature is about abstract truth, the essence of the thing, the true names that make up the world, and how to utilize them. In Egyptian magic, these true names are called Ren. It's a power that requires many years of experience and learning, which is why especially ancient mummies, not the rather young Amenti, are usually most knowledgeable about it. None of the Amenti dynasties have it as their primary Hekau path, though since the Udja-sen, the judged ones, have no immediate path to themselves, they often find themselves drawn to nomenclature. The best teachers for it are of course the shemsu-heru, who have been around long enough to learn. It is in some ways the inverse of effigy, if you will, as it seeks to draw the sublime from the mundane. But for that you really kind of need to stretch the definition of mundane, because a lot of things have true names that we would not consider the slightest bit mundane, like magic and souls. Using Ren is a practice that demands deep understanding, respect, and precision. Effects achieved by nomenclature can be incredibly diverse, but they include gathering information from things that would ordinarily be unable to perceive at all, like plants and stones, creating things and deleting them from existence, transforming things into other things by amending their name, imbuing people with emotions, and much more. Among the most powerful applications of nomenclature are retroactively erasing a person from existence. You can do that, turning one's body into any shape instantly, or commanding absolute authority over everyone. If this seems rather powerful to you, you gotta understand that nomenclature requires extensive study of Ren, and even the greatest masters only learn a few hundred names, like true names, over the course of eternity. But okay, that's Egypt, and that's cool, but what about the rest of the world? Surely, if the spell of life is a magical spell, other wizards, mages, rare though they are, must have found out how to do it, or some variation of it, and created their own mummies. And that's true, they have. In the official lore, the Egyptian spell of life is the most sophisticated of all of them. So there are, of course, those who try to copy it, some more successfully than others. The Kabiri are an example of a type of mummy that was created in Greece, with the translation of the spell of life that originated in Egypt into Greek or some Proto-Greek language. They are even rarer than Egyptian mummies, and especially after the Ja'ak, there are like probably single digits of them left. Probably less than 5, honestly. But other cultures have developed their own completely original ways of making mummies, of achieving that effect, that will rise to life again and again, and some of them are really quite different from the Egyptian ones. The Kappa-Kosha, for instance, are South American mummies, and it's really a pretty vast term for various groups of people in different geographical locations, working with variations of the same spell of life. They have more of an elemental focus to them and are conceptualized after the land they live in. This means their inherent special powers and drawbacks are also less lofty and more practical. For instance, the Intimalki do not need to drink water to survive, but are supernaturally vulnerable to steel, and the Pachimalki can repair their bodies with clay, but their corpses dissolve if placed in running water, which is of course only a problem when they're dead. While they're alive, and the water is just water to them. Many of the cultures that created Kappa-Kosha have zero temporal overlap, which is a crucial thing to note because the Kappa-Kosha depend on the communities and tribes they are tied to, their descendants in a sense, to call upon them to return from the underworld. The widespread genocides of the indigenous people of South America, primarily at the hands of the Spanish and the Portuguese colonial empires, has destroyed many of those communities and the ancient knowledge that they kept. In ancient China, meanwhile, we have the Wu-Tian, who are much more akin to the Egyptian mummies, in the sense that they are also warriors for good serving a king in the underworld. The Jade Emperor, specifically, who has been toppled and replaced by a vile demon recently. Another manifestation of oblivion, a different face of Apophis. For many years now, they've been at war with this entity, and though they are wary of each other and the world is large enough that they will essentially never meet, Egyptian and Chinese mummies recognize that, in a metaphysical sense, they do sort of have a common cause. And that's pretty much it for the main mummy books, but it really got me thinking, right? These are by far not the only cultures in the world who practiced some sort of ritual mummification. It's not at all an uncommon practice. Sure, the Egyptians did a particularly big and elaborate deal of it, but you'll find a lot of non-naturally created and preserved mummies. Because there is of course also natural mummification, but since the spell of life is a magical ritual, we must assume that it needs that intent behind it to be effective and create Reborn. You may be surprised to hear that among Christians there exists a mummification practice. The Catholic Church recognizes something called incorruptibility, which is when a body does not decompose, or at least not adequately decompose, after death. This is taken as a sign of the person being virtuous and holy because they led a life of great Christian virtue, and people prayed for their safe passage into heaven. When such a body is found to be incorruptible, it will inevitably lead to an investigation as to whether or not the person in question is a saint. In the world of darkness, I could easily see orders of Catholic mummies, of saints, returning from the dead every once in a while to serve the interests of the church and Christendom. Resurrection is a strong and common theme in Christian mythos, after all. They might be wardens of ancient monasteries and secret libraries, hunters of demons and monsters, the hidden grandmasters of the Society of Leopold, or other such organizations. Among the Maori, there existed a unique practice of mummification of warriors called Mokomokai. Only the heads, covered in warrior tattoos called tamoko that the warriors would get throughout their life, were preserved, usually to be held in reverence by their tribes and families. The heads of rival war chiefs would be taken as war trophies sometimes and ritualistically mocked as a symbolic show of diplomacy, greatly augmenting the tribe's status. Unfortunately, like many mummies outside the Western world, Egyptian mummies included, during the colonial era these were shipped and traded almost as souvenirs, knickknacks, curios by Europeans, certainly not treated with the respect that they would be afforded in their native culture. It's possible that you have one of these, or you know of one that is in someone's possession. And if you do know that, I'm going to put a link in the description to a repatriation program by the Museum of New Zealand that wants to bring these Mokomokai back where they belong. In the context of the much more sinister world of darkness, I could see these mummies utilized as sort of personal warriors by unscrupulous Western sorcerers, probably very much against their wishes. Or in fact, serving the more noble purpose of protecting their families to this day, being called upon when supernatural threats emerge. Though how much colonialism erased that knowledge from the culture of the Maori, that should be up to you. Enlightened science may also have provided pathways to creating mummies, a spell of life based in technology instead of magic. Communists in various parts of the world mummified their revered leaders, so I see no reason why in the world of darkness this should not also have happened much more frequently. This would be a truly modern practice, not ancient at all, of creating Reborn by a particular group within the technocracy that, after the fall of global socialism, probably isn't doing so hot right now politically and hasn't in a while, like within the power structure of the technocracy. One wonders if perhaps there is an equivalent of the Judges of Mart, a committee of communist ghosts judging the Reborn every time they die, as to whether they have done enough to build communism this go around. And also there would probably be a lot of debates as to like which version of communism is the correct one to be built. That's a whole campaign right there. And that is, I suppose, it for Mummy. It's a pretty niche game line, not many books exist for it. Much of the lore is actually found in other game lines, which can be a little bit frustrating. Check it out if you want a more positive spin on the world of darkness. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Support me on Patreon or Subscribestar. Buy some of this beautiful merchandise. You could have this face, my face looking at you. This is a mug, but you can also get this as a bath mat when you step out of the shower or when you're pooping. And you can also buy my short story collection. You can also read that while you're pooping, not so much while you're in the shower. And in that spirit, I'm sorry for what I feel like was rather a long absence. My internet was out for a month and a half because my landlord decided to physically cut all other ISPs but their own subsidiary out of the building without any sort of warning in order to force us renters to buy their internet. But being a massive landlord corporation, they of course were in no way ready to actually deliver that internet, so I spent most of the last 45 or so days being bounced around telephone hotlines where no one wanted to know or do anything. Eventually I contacted a federal agency and 3 days later they had sorted it out for me, no problem. The landlord was suddenly very much willing to comply and finally offer me the service they had forced upon me. And also I had a mental breakdown partly involving some of the subject matter of this very video. That was not very fun. You might say I had sort of a near-death experience, but I wasn't anywhere near death, and I'm still not anywhere near death now either. But it seriously fucked me up, nonetheless. Haha. On the teleprompter it says to say haha. I don't know why I put that there. It's not so funny. And see you around, crumbs.